Ladies and gentlemen, let's yet again discuss torque to yield bolts, the stretchy ones, the bolts that can only be used one time. Well, actually, the torque to yield bolts for your main caps and rod bearings can be reused up to 3 times. They're designed like that for assembly reasons. You have to put them together, check the clearance, back everything off if anything needs to be adjusted. Those bolts are specifically designed like that. But head bolts are not. Torque to yield bolts are bolts you torque until they yield. They begin to relent between this point and this point right here. It begins to undergo something called plastic deformation. That's when something deforms and stays deformed. The other type of deformation when you're dealing with metal is called elastic deformation. This is when something bends and then straightens back out. Obviously, I cannot compress this valve spring with my fingers, but trust me, it springs back to where it goes once you compress it. Unless it breaks like this one did. The purpose of these bolts is accuracy. When you torque a bolt with a torque wrench, your torque wrench only measures how much force it takes to overcome the friction of this head on its surface and these threads against their surface. Obviously, that's not very accurate. Every surface is going to be a little bit different. Every set of threads is going to be a little bit different. There's no way to specifically determine how much clamping force you have just by torque alone. So they made these things. These bolts undergo both types of deformation when they're tightened down. They undergo plastic deformation, which means they are permanently changed, and some elastic deformation, which means there's return force maintaining clamping force. When you tighten down a torque to yield bolt, you usually tighten them to 80% of their overall yield, which means another 20% they would either break or be deformed to the point that they are doing you no good at all. Because you cannot accurately measure or as accurately measure how much torque it takes to get the appropriate clamping force, when they design these bolts, they look at what they can measure. They measure how long these threads are and how many times you have to turn it to get the head of the bolt to meet its mating surface. And they can measure how much force it takes to stretch this section of the bolt right here. So what they have you do is turn the bolt until the head is tightly against its mounting surface, and then tighten it a little further until this section of the bolt stretches. If they know this bolt stretches at 500 pounds, they know if you over tighten this bolt, you will have 500 pounds of clamping force. The bad thing about that is because of the plastic deformation, the bolt cannot safely be reused. But the good thing about that is if you overdo it a little bit or underdo it a little bit and you're not too precise with your angles, you have about 20% to play with. So if you're 5 degrees over or 5 degrees under, you don't have to worry that you might have permanently damaged your bolt or your engine. You're going to be just fine.